Hello, my friends, and welcome back to English Rhythm. I'm Tom, and today I have a very special extended episode for you. This episode is about one complete day in the past. I will tell you what I did from the morning until the night, with many more details and stories. I will use slow English, easy sentences, and the past tense throughout this journey. This story is perfect for beginning level English learners who want to improve their listening skills and learn past tense naturally. So relax, listen carefully, and imagine traveling back in time with me. You can pause the video anytime and repeat the sentences after me. Let's begin this incredible journey together. The early morning. I woke up early in the morning. The sun was rising slowly and the first light touched the small window of my bedroom. It was not the year 2025. It was the year 1900, a time when life was completely different from today. There was no phone beside my bed. There was no alarm clock to ring loudly in my ears. There was no electricity in the house at all. I woke up only because the sunlight came through the thin curtains that my mother had sewn by hand many months ago. The bed was small and narrow. The mattress was filled with straw and feathers. The blanket was heavy and thick, made of wool from sheep that lived on farms outside our town. It kept me warm during the cold night, but the room was still very cold when I woke up. The wooden floor was icy under my feet. I sat up slowly and stretched my arms. My back felt stiff from the hard mattress. The pillow was small and flat. It was not comfortable like the pillows we have today, but it was what we had, and I was grateful for it. The room was quiet and peaceful. There was no sound of traffic rushing by. There was no sound of machines working. There were no airplanes flying overhead. Only the soft call of a bird outside the window and the gentle sound of wind moving through the trees. The walls of my room were made of wood. They were painted white, but the paint was old and starting to peel in some places. There was one small window with glass that was not very clear. Through it, I could see the street and the houses across from us. All the houses looked similar, small, simple, and made of wood or stone. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked outside at the world that was waking up. The street was empty except for one horse that was pulling a cart. The horse moved slowly, and its hooves made a clip-clop sound on the stone street. The man driving the cart was probably taking vegetables to the market to sell them. Getting ready, I washed my face with cold water from a bowl. There was no bathroom in our house, no sink with running water, and certainly no hot shower like we have today. On a small wooden table near my bed, there was a large bowl filled with water that my mother had brought from the well the night before. I put my hands inside the bowl. The water was icy cold, and it made me shiver and shake. I splashed the water on my face and rubbed it with my hands. The cold water made me feel more awake, but also much colder. I dried my face with a rough towel that hung on a nail in the wall. Then I got dressed for the day. I did not wear jeans or a t-shirt like people wear today. Those clothes did not exist in my world in 1900. Instead, I wore a simple white shirt made of cotton. I pulled it over my head and buttoned it carefully. The buttons were made of wood, not plastic. I put on my brown trousers. They were made of thick, heavy fabric that would last for many years. The fabric was rough but strong. My mother had sewn patches on the knees where the fabric had worn thin from use. On my feet, I wore heavy leather boots. They were dark brown and came up to my ankles. The leather was thick and hard. The boots were not comfortable, but they protected my feet from rocks, water, and cold. The boots had metal pieces on the bottom to make them last longer. The clothes were not new or fashionable. They had small holes here and there, and you could see where my mother had repaired them with needle and thread. The stitching was careful and neat. But the clothes were strong and warm, and they kept me safe and protected during the long working day. I combed my hair with a wooden comb. There was no mirror in my room, so I could not see how I looked. I just ran the comb through my hair and hoped it looked neat and tidy. Opening to the world, I opened the window to let fresh air into the room. The air came in cold and sharp, but it was clean and fresh. I could smell the morning, the smell of wood smoke from chimneys, the smell of horses and animals, and the sweet smell of bread baking somewhere in the distance. The street outside was still quiet. Most people were just waking up like me. A horse passed by slowly, pulling a wooden cart filled with vegetables, carrots, potatoes, and onions. The vegetables looked fresh and were covered with dirt from the fields where they had grown. There were no buses running on the streets. There were no cars driving by. There were no motorcycles or bicycles. People walked everywhere they needed to go, or they rode in carts pulled by horses. It was the start of a new day in the past, quiet and peaceful. I could hear a church bell ringing in the distance. The sound traveled across the town, telling everyone that it was time to wake up and start the day. The bell rang 7 times, which meant it was 7 o'clock in the morning. Breakfast with the family. After I dressed, I went into the kitchen where my family was already gathering. The kitchen was small but warm. There was a wooden table in the center of the room. The table was old and scratched from years of use, but it was clean and sturdy. There was no refrigerator to keep food cold. There was no electric stove to cook on. There was no electric light to brighten the room. The only light came from the window and from the fire burning in the fireplace, which also heated the room and was used for cooking. On the table there was fresh bread, yellow butter, and a large jug of milk. The bread was hard and brown on the outside but soft inside. My mother had baked it the day before in the big oven that was built into the wall near the fireplace. The bread smelled wonderful like wheat and warmth. The butter was soft and pale yellow. It had been made from cream that came from our neighbor's cow. The butter was a little salty and had a rich, creamy taste. The milk was fresh and thick. It had come from the same cow that morning. It was still warm and creamy. I sat down at the table and my family sat with me. My father sat at one end, my mother at the other end, and my little sister and brother sat beside me. We did not have enough plates for everyone, so we shared dishes. This was normal for families like ours. My father looked tired. He had worked late the night before, repairing shoes at his workbench. He was a shoemaker, and people brought their old boots and shoes to him to fix. His hands were rough and stained from working with leather and tools. I cut a piece of bread with a sharp knife. I spread butter on it with a small wooden knife. The butter melted slowly because the bread was still a little warm from being near the fire. I ate the bread slowly, enjoying the taste of the butter and the texture of the homemade bread. I drank a cup of milk from a wooden cup. The milk was creamy and thick, much thicker than the milk we drink today. It tasted different, too, richer and more natural. There was no sugar added to it, just the natural sweetness of fresh milk. My little sister chewed her bread slowly and looked at me with big, curious eyes. She smiled at me, and I smiled back. She was only 5 years old, with curly brown hair and a dirty face. She always got her face dirty, no matter how often my mother washed it. My brother was 8 years old. He was eating quickly because he was always hungry. He had brown hair like our father and serious eyes. He helped our father in the shoe shop sometimes, learning how to use the tools and work with leather. The room was simple and plain, but we were together as a family, and that made it feel warm and comfortable. We talked quietly while we ate, planning our day and sharing news from the neighborhood. Leaving for work. After breakfast, I prepared to leave the house for work. I put on my heavy coat because the morning air was cold and there was frost on the ground. The coat was made of thick wool and had large wooden buttons. It was warm but heavy on my shoulders. I said goodbye to my family. I kissed my mother on the cheek and hugged my little sister. I shook hands with my father and nodded to my brother. My mother packed me some bread and cheese in a cloth bag for my lunch later. I walked outside and closed the door behind me. The street was made of large, flat stones that had been placed there many years ago. My heavy boots made a loud sound with every step I took, thump, thump, thump on the stone street. I did not take a bus to work because there were no buses. I did not drive a car because there were no cars. There were no motorcycles, no bicycles, no trains in our small town. I walked to work every day, just like everyone else. Walking was the normal way to travel. The walk to work took me through the center of our town. I always enjoyed this walk because I could see what was happening in the neighborhood. I could observe daily life and watch people starting their day. On the way, I saw Mrs. Henderson sweeping the front steps of her house with a straw broom. She swept every morning, keeping her steps clean and tidy. She waved at me as I walked by, and I waved back. I saw young Billy carrying a heavy bucket of water from the town well. The well was in the center of town, and people came there every day to get fresh water for drinking, cooking, and washing. Billy was struggling with the bucket because it was heavy and full of water. Two old men sat on a wooden bench outside the barber shop. They were talking slowly about the weather and the crops. They sat there every morning, watching the world wake up and sharing stories about the old days when they were young. The morning air was fresh and clean. I could smell many different things as I walked. The smell of fresh bread came from the bakery where Mr. Schmidt was already baking loaves for the day. The smell of horses and their manure came from the street where several horses and carts were moving slowly. I could smell wood smoke from the chimneys of houses where families were cooking breakfast and heating their homes. I could smell the leather and oil from the harness shop where they made equipment for horses. The walk to the factory. I walked for about 30 minutes through different parts of the town. First, I walked through the residential area where families lived in small houses. The houses were close together, and each had a small garden where people grew vegetables and kept chickens. Then I walked through the commercial area where the shops were located. The bakery, the butcher's shop, the general store, and the post office were all on the main street. Shop owners were opening their doors and preparing for the day of business. Finally, I walked to the industrial area where the factory was located. The factory was at the edge of the town, away from the houses and shops. It was built there so that the noise and smoke would not bother the families who lived in town. As I got closer to the factory, I saw many other workers walking the same direction. We all started work at the same time, so we all walked together in the early morning. Some men walked alone, thinking about the day ahead. Others walked in small groups, talking and laughing. The factory was very large and made of red brick. It was 3 stories tall and had many windows. Black smoke came out of several tall chimneys, rising into the sky and making gray clouds. The walls of the building were dark and dirty from years of smoke and soot. When I arrived at the factory gate, I saw dozens of other workers going inside through the large wooden doors. The men walked quickly because we were not allowed to be late. Being late meant losing money from our pay, and we needed every penny to feed our families. Inside the factory, the atmosphere was completely different from the quiet morning outside. The machines were loud and made constant heavy sounds: bang, clank, whir, thump. The noise never stopped during the working day, and it was so loud that we had to shout to hear each other. The air inside was thick and difficult to breathe. Dust and small particles floated everywhere from the work being done. There was also steam from some of the machines, which made the air hot and humid. The smell was a mixture of oil, metal, wood, and sweat. The factory floor was enormous. Machines filled the space: big machines, small machines, machines that cut wood, machines that shaped metal, machines that moved materials from one place to another. The machines were powered by steam, and you could hear the steam hissing and see it rising in clouds. I worked with many other men in different areas of the factory. Some men carried heavy pieces of wood from one area to another. Some worked with hot metal, shaping it into different forms with hammers and tools. Some pushed wooden carts loaded with materials from one side of the factory to the other. My job was to carry boxes and move heavy pieces of lumber. The boxes contained parts and supplies that were needed in different areas of the factory. The lumber was used to make furniture and other wooden products. Everything had to be moved by hand because there were no machines to help us lift and carry. It was very hard physical work. My hands became red and rough from gripping the wooden boxes and lumber. My shirt became dirty with sawdust and sweat. My back hurt from lifting and carrying heavy things all day long. But I was grateful to have work because many men in our town had no jobs at all. The factory boss walked between us throughout the day, watching us work. He wore a black hat and carried a wooden stick. He dressed better than us workers. He wore a clean white shirt, a vest, and polished shoes. He did not do physical work like we did. The boss did not speak much to us workers. He just looked at everyone carefully to make sure we were working hard and not wasting time. If someone worked too slowly or made a mistake, the boss would speak to them sharply. Everyone was afraid of losing their job. We worked for hours without stopping. There was no break in the morning, just continuous work. The sun moved across the sky outside, but inside the factory, it always felt the same hot, dusty, and noisy. Midday break and afternoon work. At midday, a large bell rang to signal our lunch break. We had exactly 30 minutes to eat and rest before we had to start working again. I was grateful for this short break because my body was tired and sore. I sat on the hard floor with my back against a wooden post. I took out the bread and cheese that my mother had packed for me. The bread was now dry and the cheese was warm, but it tasted good because I was very hungry from the morning's work. I ate slowly, trying to make the food last longer and to enjoy the break from work. I drank water from a small metal cup that I carried with me. The water was warm and had a metallic taste, but it helped to clear the dust from my throat. Around me, other workers were also eating their simple lunches. Some had bread and meat. Others had only bread or maybe an apple. We were all quiet, too tired to talk much. We just wanted to rest our bodies and prepare for the afternoon of work. After exactly 30 minutes, the bell rang again. We all stood up, brushed the crumbs from our clothes, and went back to our workstations. The afternoon work was the same as the morning: lifting, carrying, moving materials, and operating machines. The afternoon seemed to pass more slowly than the morning. My body was already tired from the morning work, so every hour felt longer. My hands had blisters from gripping rough wood and metal. My legs ached from standing and walking on the hard factory floor. But I continued working because I had no choice. In 1900, there were no laws protecting workers. There were no labor unions to help us. There were no safety rules or regulations. We worked hard because we needed the money to survive, and there were many other men who would take our jobs if we complained or worked poorly. The machines continued their loud, constant noise. The air remained thick and difficult to breathe. The work was repetitive and tiring. But slowly, very slowly, the afternoon passed, and finally, we could see through the windows that the sun was getting lower in the sky. End of the work day. When the final bell rang at the end of the day, we all stopped working immediately. The sound of the machines gradually became quieter as they were turned off one by one. The sudden relative quiet felt strange after hours of constant noise. I was exhausted. My clothes were dirty and soaked with sweat. My boots felt heavy on my feet. My hands were cut and bruised from the day's work. Every muscle in my body was tired and sore. But I was proud that I had completed another day of honest work. I walked slowly toward the factory doors with dozens of other workers. We moved like a tired river of men, all heading home to our families. Some men talked quietly about the day's work or made plans for the evening. Others, like me, were too tired to talk and just wanted to get home. Outside the factory, the evening air felt cool and fresh after the hot, dusty air inside. I took several deep breaths, filling my lungs with clean air. The difference was wonderful, like stepping from a cave into the open world. The sun was lower in the sky now, casting long shadows across the street. The light was golden and warm, very different from the harsh artificial light inside the factory. I looked up at the sky and felt grateful to be outside in the natural world again. The walk home. I began the long walk home through the town. The streets looked different in the evening light. The shadows were longer, and the colors were warmer. The stone street seemed to glow in the golden sunlight. On the street, I saw children playing games. A group of boys was playing with a ball made of cloth scraps sewn together. They kicked it back and forth, laughing and shouting with joy. Their faces were dirty but happy. They had spent the day playing while their fathers worked in factories and shops. A group of women was washing clothes in large wooden buckets filled with soapy water. They scrubbed the clothes hard against wooden boards, trying to remove the dirt and stains. They talked together while they worked, sharing news and gossip from the neighborhood. The women's hands were red and rough from the harsh soap and cold water. Washing clothes was hard work that took several hours each week. There were no washing machines to make the job easier. Everything had to be done by hand. I saw a man selling apples from a wooden cart. The apples were red and yellow, fresh from orchards outside the town. People stood in a line to buy some for their families. Fresh fruit was a special treat, not something people ate every day. The smell of cooking food came from open windows as I passed by houses. Families were preparing their evening meals. I could smell soup cooking, bread baking, and meat roasting. The smells made me hungry and eager to get home to my own family's dinner. As I walked, I looked up at the sky. It was changing colors slowly as the sun moved toward the horizon. The blue afternoon sky was becoming orange and pink and red. The colors were beautiful and dramatic, painted across the whole sky like a masterpiece. But the changing colors also told me that night was coming soon. In 1900, when the sun went down, the world became dark. There were no street lights, no electric signs, no lights in windows. When night came, people stayed inside their homes with candles and oil lamps. Arriving home. When I finally arrived home, the house looked warm and welcoming. Smoke was coming from the chimney, which meant my mother had started a fire in the fireplace. Light glowed softly in the windows from candles and oil lamps inside. I opened the heavy wooden door and stepped inside. Immediately, I felt the warmth of the house surround me. After the cold evening air outside, the warmth felt wonderful and comforting. The house smelled like home, like wood smoke from the fireplace, like bread and cooking food, like the soap my mother used to clean. These familiar smells told me I was safe and welcome after the long, hard day of work. My family was happy to see me return safely. My little sister ran to me and hugged my legs. My mother smiled and asked about my day. My father looked up from his workbench where he was repairing shoes and nodded at me. My brother continued playing with wooden toys by the fireplace. I took off my heavy coat and boots. I washed my hands and face in a bowl of clean water that my mother had prepared. The water felt good on my tired skin, washing away the dust and dirt from the factory. Evening dinner. Inside the house, the fire was burning brightly in the large stone fireplace. The flames danced and crackled, sending warm light and shadows across the room. The fire heated the entire house and was also used for cooking our meals. The wooden table was set and ready for dinner. Our evening meal was simple but satisfying. There was a large pot of vegetable soup, fresh bread, and some cooked vegetables from our garden. The food was plain but nutritious and filling. The soup was hot and steamed in our bowls. It smelled wonderful like onions, carrots, potatoes, and herbs. My mother had cooked it slowly all afternoon, letting the flavors blend together. I dipped pieces of bread into the soup and ate slowly, enjoying every spoonful. My family sat around the table together, and we talked about our day. My father told us about the shoes he had repaired and the customers who had visited his shop. My mother spoke about the work she had done in the house, cooking, cleaning, sewing, and taking care of my little sister. My brother told us about the games he had played with neighborhood children. My sister tried to tell us about her day too, but she was only 5 years old, so her stories were funny and confusing. We all laughed at her sweet attempts to tell us about her adventures. Even though we were tired from our work, we enjoyed being together as a family. We talked and laughed, and shared our experiences. This time together was important because it connected us and made us feel like we belonged to something bigger than just ourselves. Evening activities. After dinner, we stayed together in the main room of the house. There was no television to watch because television had not been invented yet. There was no radio to listen to because radio had not been invented either. There were no electronic devices of any kind. Instead, we entertained ourselves by talking, telling stories, and doing quiet activities. My father told us stories about his childhood, when he was a boy growing up on a farm outside the town. He used his hands to show us how he had played in the fields and helped with farm animals. He told us about helping his father plant crops in the spring, watching them grow during the summer, and harvesting them in the fall. He described how they had worked together as a family to survive and prosper. His stories helped us understand where we came from and what our family had experienced. My little sister played with her favorite doll, which my mother had made from cloth scraps and stuffed with rags. The doll had a simple face painted with ink and wore a tiny dress sewn from leftover fabric. My sister talked to the doll as if it were alive and carried it everywhere she went. My brother sat on the floor cleaning his boots for the next day. He used a rag and some oil to make the leather soft and waterproof. This was important because his boots had to last a long time, and taking care of them properly would help them protect his feet. My brother sat on the floor cleaning his boots for the next day. He used a rag and some oil to make the leather soft and waterproof. This was important because his boots had to last a long time, and taking care of them properly would help them protect his feet. My mother sat in a chair near the fireplace, mending clothes by candlelight. She had a basket full of clothes that needed repairs: socks with holes, shirts with torn seams, trousers with worn knees. She worked carefully with needle and thread, making the clothes strong and useful again. I sat near the fire and watched the flames dance in the fireplace. The fire made crackling and popping sounds as it burned the wood. The light from the fire cast moving shadows on the walls, creating patterns that changed constantly. The only other light in the room came from 2 candles on the table. The candle flames flickered gently, giving off a soft, warm light. But the light was not very bright, so we had to sit close together to see what we were doing. Preparing for sleep. As the evening continued, the house gradually became quieter. The fire in the fireplace slowly became smaller as the wood burned down. The candles became shorter as the wax melted away. We all began to feel sleepy after the long day. My father put away his shoemaking tools and cleaned his workbench for the next day. My mother finished mending the clothes and put away her sewing supplies. My brother and sister played quietly with their simple toys. Outside, the night was becoming completely dark. Through the windows, I could not see anything except darkness. There were no street lights to illuminate the roads. There were no lights in other houses because everyone used candles and oil lamps sparingly to save money. The world outside was silent except for the sound of wind blowing through the trees and the occasional sound of a horse and cart passing by on the stone street. Sometimes we could hear a dog barking in the distance, or an owl calling from the woods outside town. One by one, my family members began to go to their bedrooms. My little sister was the first to become sleepy. My mother carried her to bed and tucked her under the heavy blankets. My brother followed soon after, yawning and rubbing his eyes. My parents stayed up a little longer, talking quietly by the dying fire about plans for the next day and concerns about the family. They spoke in low voices so they would not disturb us children who were trying to sleep. Going to bed. Finally, I went to my small bedroom. The room was cold because there was no heat except what came from the main fireplace. I could see my breath in the cold air, making small clouds when I exhaled. The bed was exactly as I had left it that morning: small, narrow, and covered with the heavy woolen blanket. The mattress was filled with straw and feathers, which made it lumpy and uneven but better than sleeping on the hard floor. I took off my work clothes and put on my nightshirt, which was made of thick cotton. The nightshirt was long and warm, designed to keep me comfortable during the cold night. I folded my work clothes neatly and placed them on a chair so they would be ready for the next day. I climbed into bed and pulled the heavy blanket over me. The wool blanket was scratchy against my skin, but it was very warm and would keep me comfortable throughout the night. I could feel the weight of the blanket pressing down on me, which was actually comforting. Outside my window, the night was completely silent and peaceful. There were no cars driving by making noise. There were no machines running or airplanes flying overhead. There were no electric lights creating artificial brightness. The world was dark and quiet, the way night was supposed to be. I could hear only the gentle sound of wind moving through the trees outside and the occasional settling sound of the wooden house as it cooled down from the day's warmth. These natural sounds were soothing and helped me relax after the long, hard day. Reflection on the day. As I lay in bed, I thought about the day I had just lived. It had been a typical day in my life in the year 1900. It was not an easy life compared to how people live today, but it was a real life, lived with purpose and surrounded by family. The work in the factory was hard and tiring, but it provided money for my family to survive. The simple meals were plain but nutritious and satisfying. The evening with my family was quiet but filled with love and connection. Life in 1900 was slower and more difficult than life today, but it was also more connected to natural rhythms. We woke up with the sun and went to sleep when it became dark. We ate food that was grown locally and prepared simply. We worked with our hands and bodies rather than with machines. We were connected to our community and our neighbors. We knew the people who lived around us and depended on each other for help and support. We told stories and shared experiences rather than watching entertainment created by strangers. There were many hardships in life in 1900. Medical care was limited and many people died young from diseases that can be cured today. Work was physically demanding and dangerous. Education was limited and many people could not read or write. Women had fewer opportunities and rights than they have today. But there were also some advantages to life in that time. Families were close and spent time together every day. People lived more simply and were satisfied with less material possessions. The air and water were cleaner because there were fewer factories and cars. People had stronger connections to nature and the changing seasons. Falling asleep. As these thoughts moved through my mind, I gradually became more and more sleepy. The physical exhaustion from the day's work, combined with the warmth of the blanket and the quietness of the night, made my eyelids heavy. I listened to my own breathing becoming slower and deeper. I felt my muscles relaxing as the tension from the day's work gradually left my body. The simple comfort of lying down after standing and walking all day felt wonderful. Slowly, very slowly, I drifted toward sleep. My thoughts became less clear and more dreamlike. The events of the day began to fade into memory as sleep approached. And then, finally, I fell asleep, ending another day in my simple life in the past. Conclusion. And that, my friends, was my complete story, a full day in the past, lived in the year 1900. It was not a fast-paced day filled with modern conveniences and technology. Instead, it was simple, hard-working, and quiet, but also meaningful and connected to family and community. I hope this extended story has helped you practice listening to English and understanding the past tense. By imagining this day in the past, you have also learned about how people lived over a century ago, when life was very different from today. Remember, learning English takes time and practice, just like the work people did in 1900. Be patient with yourself and keep practicing every day. Listen to stories like this one, repeat the sentences out loud, and gradually your English will improve. Thank you for taking this journey back in time with me. Thank you for listening to this episode of English Rhythm. I hope you enjoyed this glimpse into life in the past and that it inspired you to keep learning and improving your English skills. Until next time, keep learning, keep practicing, and keep believing in yourself. Remember that every day of practice makes you stronger, just like every day of work in 1900 made people stronger and more capable. Goodbye for now, my friends, and I'll see you in the next episode.